All right. I'm going to go ahead and start doing a little kickoff here. And as folks continue to join, we'll just let them join. Welcome to the Greater Cincinnati Grottoes March technical topic. This month we have Adam Hjermenrud, who is a trip coordinator for the Louisville Grotto and also a very prolific caver. He, I think, logs about 100 trips per year. So way more caving than I think the average person gets to do in a year. Proximity to karst obviously helps that. But his talk this month is, are you prepared for caving? So what better person to kind of give us a little bit of perspective and look at what's in our packs and what we do before the cave trip to help us make sure that everything goes smoothly. With that, we'll turn it over to Adam and let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, like Steph said, my name's Adam Hjermenrud. I'm the vice chair for Louisville Grotto. I'm also the program coordinator, so I plan all of the intro trips and grotto trips. We normally do those about monthly. And I'm a project carer from Breckinridge County, and in Breckinridge County we have a lot of caves in Breckinridge County. The place is full of holes, so there's always something to do around here. And for those of you that have been to Big Bat Cave, I actually live only 10 minutes away from the entrance there. So Steph said today we're going to talk about being prepared for the cave trip, but also for planning a cave trip, because most of what we do to ensure that we're caving safely actually happens before we ever get to the entrance. So today we're going to outline the best practices, and even though we're talking about the best practices, I know that there's times where we all intentionally make bad decisions, that we sometimes break the rules. But today we're just going to talk about the things that we should be doing technically. So the first thing I like to think about when I'm planning a trip is actually what we're doing, what we're planning to do with that trip. So is it a hardcore trip where we need a team of folks with specialized skills, or is it just a introductory trip with a lot of new people? Because each of these different kinds of trips have very unique needs, not only in the equipment that we're carrying, but also in the mindset of exactly how we're thinking about the trip and the things that we're aware of during it. So if you take it upon yourself to decide to lead a cave trip, one of the most important things to remember is that if you're going to be a leader on a cave trip, is to be a leader. So being the leader of a cave trip, you're responsible for knowing all the answers, of knowing where we're going, what we're doing, what we're going to do when we get there. I have a rule myself that I generally won't take a group unless it's a project trip. I won't take a group of folks on a recreational trip to someplace I've never been, for the most part, because that ensures that at least that that challenge of actually being able to navigate through the cave, that part I've got under control. And then I can deal with the other things that occur around me as the trip progresses. So it's a good idea to know the route. Also to plan for contingencies, which we'll talk about that more later when we get to talking about gear. But there's times when you can take the route in the cave that actually allows you a way to take a different route that'll be shorter, or to cut part of your trip off. So that's something to be aware of also in the planning stages of your trip, is to know the route that you're going to take, and then also plan for if things don't go great. If you end up with someone who's tired, or exhausted, or if you do have an injury, and things of that like that. Also, when you're planning the trip and you're getting your group together to do it, we really need to be honest about what the trip entails. Because I know a lot of times, especially with project cavers, it's real easy when you're trying to recruit folks to go do a trip that you kind of downplay the difficulty a little bit. But it's important to make sure that everyone's aware of exactly the challenges that are ahead of them. And also, if you're not honest about the difficulty of the trip, especially if you're leading trips for some of the cave festivals, that you can actually end up having to deal with the consequences later of people being misinformed about how difficult the trip is. Um, Also, during the planning stage, it's important to contact the landowner or whoever runs the preserve, whoever owns the cave. Which I know out in Rock Castle, there's a lot of caves that are publicly accessed. I know there's some of that up in Indiana as well. In my area, almost every place that I go cave is actually on private land. It's either private land or it is owned by a conservancy of some sort, SCCI or KKC. Um, so it's important to contact the landowner prior to actually announcing the trip. We've actually had an incident a while back to where a trip was announced that they had planned to do, and the landowner hadn't been notified of it yet. And it actually caused a lot of conflict because the landowner was under the impression they were going to go on the trip without asking for permission. Um, so make sure you talk to the landowners first. They are the most important thing for us, especially around here where most of our caves are on private land. It's important to keep them happy and informed. Um, Also, places that have permits, it's important to make sure that the permits aren't full because there would be nothing worse than to plan a trip somewhere and have 12 guys that are ready to go, um, then find out that the permit's actually full for that day and you can't go. Um, Also, in respect to private landowners, an important conversation to have is to ensure you know where to park to where you're not going to be blocking their equipment, blocking their barns. Um, do they want you in the driveway? Do they not want you to park over here because it's wet and you get stuck? There's a lot of considerations with where to leave your vehicles. Um, in addition to, once again, with a lot of our caves being on private land, we're often caving on the weekends. And sometimes our landowners also have some special considerations for things that they're trying to do um, on their property on their weekend. If they have a birthday party or some holiday that happens to be that weekend, to just be considerate of them and make sure we keep them happy to make sure that we can keep access. The next consideration as we're planning the trip here, so we've decided what we're doing and we've decided we're leading the trip. We've got the landowner permission. Um, is arranging a call out. Um, for a call out, there's a couple different things that we're looking for the person that we want to be our call out. For one, we want them to be responsible. In other words, they're not going to forget that they're your call out. Um, it's always nice to have a caver, but sometimes there's a couple of guys that I cave with. Their wife actually is very concerned when they're underground, and generally is a nervous wreck the whole time. And so they generally end up being a very good call out for us because we know they're paying attention and that they're going to notice if their husband doesn't come home. Um, so another consideration is it's nice if they're local. Because if you are approaching or over your call out time, it is nice to have someone that can swing by, check the parking area, that knows where the cave is, and it's not hours away. Um, Also, on longer trips, it's a good idea to make sure it's someone who's going to be awake at that time of day. Some of these trips, if we go in the morning, we may not get out until 2 or 3 o'clock at night, a.m. Um, and if there were to be a problem, and you were supposed to be out at 2 a.m., but then your call out was asleep at that time and didn't get up till 7, and then noticed that you hadn't made out of the cave yet, then you have a whole other set of problems if you actually needed your call out. So make sure that it's going to be someone who's awake or plan your trip around when your call out's going to be available. Also, we need to make sure that our call out knows that if there is a problem, or I'm sorry, if you run over your call out, that they need to respond urgently. Because if you're not out by that time, that there's definitely a problem. There's a culture that has been kind of perpetuated. I'm sorry, I got a call. Hopefully, you guys caught that. So there's um, there's a culture that has occurred to where there's some people that run over their call out time often enough that it seems to not be a big deal. They say, "Oh, they're always a little late. They must have found something cool. There must not be a problem." But the problem is that when that happens, and there actually is a problem, that it adds that time to the time before your call out person actually shows up. So if you are the call out, or if you have a call out, you need to make sure that it's clear that if I'm not out by this time, to come looking for us, because there's definitely a problem. Um, Also, in regards to call out times, we tend to be a little loose with them, and I'm guilty of this myself. To where it's someone asks what's your call out time, and say, "Oh, when the sun comes up." If we're not out of the cave by 7 a.m., then come looking for us. But once again, the problem is that if you do actually have a problem, that now you've added that time. So if there was a immobilizing injury, or some problem that occurred at midnight, and your realistic call out time were 2 o'clock or 3 a.m., then you're going to have to wait that entire night until 7 a.m. in the morning, and that's when they start to come looking for you. So make sure that we keep call out times reasonable and not exaggerated. Now, a lot of the caves around here, and I know a lot of the caves up in Indiana as well, flood very badly. So we need to keep an eye on the weather. Um, Forecasts change quickly. So we need to make sure that just because we checked a couple days ago, that we go ahead and check again before we go into the cave. Um, and listen to the old timers, because I've got a couple old timers that I talk to with some regularity, and I'll bounce it off of them. If I look at the weather report and it rained recently, but it's a low chance for this day, and I know there's a delay in how quickly the cave floods, then a lot of times I'll bounce it off the old timers and say, "Hey, what do you think about this? What's your impressions of the conditions in the cave? Do you think it's safe?" And 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 also, it's a nice idea, especially for a intro trip or recreational trip, because on a project trip we generally have a thing that we're trying to do, and um, so having a backup cave isn't really a thing, because we're going there to do the thing. But if it is a recreational trip, or say a grotto trip, an intro trip, it's a great idea to have another cave, preferably in the area, um, that doesn't flood, that's safe to visit if it is raining. So yeah, it's real important to watch the weather, especially leading up to the trip, because some people, especially when they're traveling a long way, it's nice if you see that it's 100% chance of rain the day before and the day of the trip, and days ahead of time that chances are you're not going to go. Um, it's nice to keep an eye on the weather long ahead of time. That way you can let folks know. So now you've got to the point to where you can gather up your folks and go caving. A lot of the trips that we do, as far as grotto trips and intro trips, we schedule those on Facebook. So since you're not talking to people face to face, or even over Zoom like we are now, it's a great idea to have a good, clear, descriptive, written description on the trip of exactly what to expect. Especially when it comes to things like exposure, or if it's a grotto trip that's vertical, just so everybody knows what to expect before they get there, and they have some idea of how to prepare. Need to have a meeting location that has a couple things going for it. You need a meeting location that can handle the amount of vehicles that are going to show up, because there's a gas station we used to use, um, and still do sometimes, as a meeting location. But if you have a large group, the parking lot just simply isn't big enough. So what we actually did was end up moving down the road to a larger parking lot in front of a grocery store, and the grocery store is really easy to find. Um, so keep that in mind: how many people are going to be there, and how many vehicles you're going to have to accommodate in the place that you're meeting. Um, Something else to take into consideration is that where I live, we're right on the border between Central Time and Eastern Time, and it's always confusing, especially with it being the Louisville Grotto. Most people come from Louisville. Um, a lot of the folks that I cave with are coming from the Cincinnati area or out east somewhere. But our meeting location's actually in Central Time. So it's a great idea when you're planning your trips to make sure that the time specified, you specify the time zone, because it's inevitable that someone doesn't pay attention to what time zone it is and will show up an hour late. Um, it happens quite often around here just because, like I say, a lot of folks are coming from east of the time zone. Their GPS says you'll arrive at this time. Well, that time is in Central Time. So take note of that. Uh, Also, at the meeting location, when you're meeting folks, I'll generally um, try to wear a cave appropriate, or well, not appropriate, but some kind of attire that shows that I'm a caver, because some of these people you've never met before. So they need to be able to find you, and some of the people that are showing up on the trip may not know anyone that's there. So it's a good idea to do that. Or what I've done in the past is just take my helmet and set up on the hood of my truck. Something that outwardly shows like, hey, this is where everyone's assembling. And and as I'm meeting people, I try to keep things upbeat, because more morale is one of the most important things to keep in mind um, on a lot of these cave trips, because morale can really make or break a cave trip. Um, if any of you guys have ever been on a cave trip where everybody got down in the dumps and cold and tired and exhausted, and things just go downhill from there. It's so what I try to do is, from the beginning, from when I meet everybody at our meeting area, um, to try to keep morale high. Even though sometimes you'll find people say, "Oh, this is going to be terrible," and I don't know if I'm going to like this, and try to keep things upbeat, and and keep that momentum going as you get into the cave. Um, Carpooling. Generally, a lot of places I cave, there's limited parking. And when people do carpool, keep in mind that they're going to have to get back to their car, and they're going to have been in the cave by that time. So they're going to be dirty. So to avoid having to let people borrow clothes and people having to ride back in their underwear, um, I try to remind everybody that if we're carpooling, to make sure that you take your clean clothes and take a garbage bag to put your dirty clothes in, because that's often forgot. And I've even forgotten that myself riding with other people. And then that makes it challenging, because whoever it was that was so kind to give you a ride there may not want to give you a ride back when you're in your dirty cave clothes. Um, Also, when leading a trip, make no assumptions. There's a friend of mine that says that smart people only do so many dumb things, but stupidity is infinite. And what's even worse is when people just don't know. Um, there's a lot of things for those of us who cave often that we will just assume that people know, or that they'll have, or that they'll be prepared for. Um, so I try not to make any assumptions, and anything that crosses your mind where you wonder, like, hey, do they know this? Do they realize that that's not going to be appropriate for this environment, or the way they're, um, some piece of gear that they have that might be marginal, that from experience is not going to hold up? You might want to go ahead and stop them there. Actually, it was a couple weeks ago. We did a trip with some hiking folks, and a gentleman had on a bike helmet, which a bicycle helmet's okay for for just your first trip. Um, but he had this like LED light that was kind of duct taped on the top, and we said, that's going to fall off like 5 minutes into the cave. There's no doubt about it. And then we're going to have to find a way to put this thing back on. So we went ahead, and before we even got to the cave, we said, "Hey, we've got a cave appropriate helmet for you and a light. Let us hook you up," and we did, and things worked out. And it was funny because actually after the fact, he said, I'm glad that you guys caught that because it would have been miserable with the stuff that I had. So, yeah, it certainly would have been. Which also talking about loaner gear. Before the trips, generally I'll ask folks, hey, is there any gear that anybody needs? Let me know before the trip. That way I can make sure I have it. Um, so I bring that, and then I always bring some extra because of situations just like that with the bike helmet where you discover something there or somebody failed to tell you that they needed knee pads or what have you. Um, so yeah, I generally will bring a couple extra sets of gear just in case. Let's see. So once again, the day of your cave trip, I generally do it either that morning when I'm loading up or when I get to the meeting location is check the weather again. Once again, not critical for all caves, but for the places around here, Big Back Cave, where I cave most often, floods completely to the ceiling. And I know some of the Indiana folks have some caves that flood pretty badly. And even some of the Rock Castle caves flood pretty bad. So it's important to make sure that's part of your checklist is to check the weather um, just before going. Now, when we're at the meeting location, generally is when I'll kind of give a little bit of talk about the impact for the landowner, because we're getting ready to load up in our cars and head to the place where we're going to park. Um, so this is where I'll kind of give the talk about like, hey, when we get there, for instance, one of the places we park is in a field, and they've got crops and things planted in that field, and he doesn't mind us driving over them as long as we keep it all consolidated, as long as that impact on that field is kept to a minimum and kept in a small area. So I explained that to him, explained that, like, hey, let's not do any yelling and screaming and loud laughing and honking horns and whatever other noisy thing you could possibly do. Uh, that way we don't disturb the landowners. And also changing because there's some places depending on the landowner where they're more sensitive to that than others. So these are all conversations that need to be had at the meeting location before you even move to where the cave is. About making sure that like, hey, the landowner might come out and talk to us and just be polite and be pleasant. Um, and also because like I said, that when I was making my notes for this talk, I kept going back and forth between the kind of the two hats that I wear a lot of the times, between project caving and between like intro trips. So there's going to be a little bit of information for kind of both of those things in here. Something else to consider about landowner impact is the time. If you're taking a long trip and you know you're going to be out late or even the next morning, what I try to do generally is let the landowners know beforehand, not only like, hey, do you mind if we come out and visit your cave, but also don't be alarmed if you notice that our cars are still there long after dark, because some of the landowners will see that and wonder if everything's okay because they, you know, generally would expect you to be out of the cave by then. So for things like that, I'll especially let the landowner know. Also, any trips um, where you're going to be getting out late. A lot of times I'll mention that and say, hey, is it a problem if we're out of the cave at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning? Because you don't want to be slamming doors and making the dogs bark and things like that. So it's just being considerate. And like I said, we try to do our best around here to treat the landowners really well because we're very fortunate that they allow us to come out and visit their caves. Um, so also while you're getting things together and getting ready, you get to the cave and everybody's gearing up. I try to keep an eye out on people. See if everybody's feeling good. At some of the cave festivals, pay attention. Are they hung over? Is everybody healthy? Does anyone appear injured or limping around like they have recent injury or they slept wrong and their back hurts? These are all real important things to be aware of with your team because these are all things that we're going to have to deal with um, at some point. And also, even once again for project caving, does everybody feel good? physically and mentally, especially if it's going to be a long and grueling trip. Um, this thing that we do is difficult. Um, it's difficult on our bodies. It's difficult mentally at times. So just listening to your teammates and keeping an eye on them and noticing, and talk to them about it. If you notice someone is not quite in the right headspace, you might say, hey, are you feeling this today? Are you good to go? Um, just to make sure that they are truly prepared, because sometimes there are some psychological crises that can happen underground that are best avoided if at all possible. And excuse me if I do a little bit of coughing or clear my throat. I've been getting over a sinus thing. So once we get to the entrance, um, generally I'll give, if I know it, history of the cave itself, or history of the entrance, or when it was, um, when the entrance was dug or when it was discovered, uh, which is nice. Give some history of the cave and a little bit of education along the way. This is where I do my final gear check. Look around and make sure, like, did anybody leave their knee pads at the car? Does everybody have knee pads on? Does everybody have gloves? Everybody's got helmets, lights. Did everybody bring their pack down? Um, I also will assign someone to be tail gunner. Occasionally, this is figured out ahead of time because, um, if it's a trip with new people, I'll have somebody I know be the tail, just so I know what's going on either end of the trip. Um, and also do a head count. Um, I generally wait to do the head count until I get to the entrance, because normally everyone's gathered around right there, and I can kind of account for everyone because they're clustered together. So that's where I'll go ahead and do the head count. I also prefer for whoever's tailing the trip to do a head count also, because that double checks me. So then this is where I give the talk. Um, Once again, during the pre-trip briefing, we need to also keep the morale high. So, um, I try to keep things upbeat and try to keep things positive. Um, don't say, "Oh, we're gonna go in here and don't touch anything." But keep things upbeat. And the pre-trip briefing for, say, project cavers or somebody going on a survey trip or a dig trip, that may just be a fist bump. Because we may not need to have a briefing beforehand. It's just simple acknowledgement of, hey, here we go. Um, so also at the entrance, I'll go through a verbal gear list. So not only visually check, but go through and say, okay, does everybody have their helmets, their lights, their knee pads, spare batteries, spare lights, snacks, water? And that makes everybody kind of go through that in their head. That way, if they did forget something, we can take care of it then and not have to worry about it later. I'll also ask if anyone has any medical problems that we need to know about. Um, they don't have to say them out loud. You can pull us to the side. But things specifically like diabetes, epilepsy, heart conditions, recent injury, medications they may need underground, or anything else that we would need to know if there were an emergency. Because the last thing that we need is for someone to have skipped breakfast that's diabetic and then get underground, get exhausted, the blood sugar gets low, and we don't know why or what the problem is. That just compounds the situation. Where at least if we know what the problem could be, then that would lead us to down the road of taking the correct steps that we need to solve the problem. Um, Also, I'll let folks know that if they have a problem, to make sure they tell someone, either me in the front or the tail, or I'll point out, any other responsible caver that's around, just so that problem doesn't get worse. If they have a blister, if they're just not feeling well, if they're not feeling well psychologically, if they say, hey, I'm not having fun anymore, I don't want to be here. Well, I don't want to take them further into the cave if they're already not feeling well. If they have a gear failure, if a strap on knee pad breaks or something on their helmet's messed up, or a lot of times it is the bands on their headlamps will slide off their helmet depending on what helmet they have. and it just becomes a thing that they've got to continually deal with. If they have any sort of illness or they begin to feel unwell underground, um, that includes having to go to the bathroom, because that does happen from time to time. So I always try to impress on everyone to let us know, because we would rather catch it early before a minor problem becomes a big problem. So be sure and speak up if there's anything going on. And then I go through the responsibility of the tail. So for me, whoever's tailing my trip, I like for them to not pass anyone. So I let everyone know that, hey, if you stop to tie your shoe and whoever's the tail gunner is just standing behind you and not going past you, um, there's a reason for that, because they want to make sure that everyone on the trip is between me and the tail gunner. That way, once we get through an obstacle, that I could just make sure whoever is my tail gunner is back there. And if they have cleared the obstacle, I know that we have everybody. Now I'll go ahead and take head counts at intervals throughout the trip. Um, but in that particular instance, I can say, hey, are so and so back there? And they said, yep, I'm here. They go, okay, we can move on. Um, so I let everybody know that. That way, when the tail gunner's standing there waiting for them to get their stuff together, they know why they're waiting. Then I go through, take all the pictures, leave only footprints, kill nothing but time. I let everybody know that there's going to be some awesome rocks in this cave. Please don't put them in your pockets, as tempting as it will be. Um, and of course, if you have any trash, if anything falls off, if you see something, um, you know, buttons and different little shreds of gear that come off, to go ahead and pick them up on your way through. That way, you don't leave your trash in the cave. And generally explain that there's going to be some wildlife in here. There may be bats, there may be crawfish. Um, tell a little bit about them and how to interact around them. Because once again, we can't make any assumptions, because it's any time that I've made an assumption about how people would behave, they proved me wrong. It seems. Um, some of the caves that I go to are very decorated, and one would assume that no one would take their muddy gloves and touch the pretty white formations, but it never fails that somebody does. Um, so I just make sure to go through the whole thing. Explain rock and what rock means. That rocks are rocks. They're also water bottles. They're also any other thing that happens to be falling. Where we're going to leave the key is important, because if it's on my person or in my pack and there's a problem with me, then folks need to know how to get back out, if we lock the gate behind us. And then also take questions and remind everyone that it's your last chance to go pee for quite some time. Then we go caving. Um, so once we get in the cave, I try to. It's difficult sometimes, but I try to get the slowest folks up in the front to set the pace. That's a pretty standard thing to do. Um, but it seems that they tend to always shuffle back to the rear. So um, I try to stay cognizant of the pace that we're making, and to monitor the condition of the slower cavers, because generally what will happen is that you'll get through an obstacle, you stop and wait, and then everybody gets through. Well, you've been sitting there for 10 minutes waiting for everybody to show up, and whoever the slowest caver was just clear the obstacle and then say, all right, let's go. So the person who needs the break the most actually is the one that didn't get a break at all. um, so that's important to keep in mind as well. When the groups get spread out, especially when it's a larger group, need to stay in voice contact between you or your chunk of folks that are with you and the next people back. That way, if there is a problem or if there's any question about which way to go or things like that, that you can communicate and stay in voice contact the entire time. Um, and also, once again, keeping morale high. Be a cheerleader. You guys are doing great. We're making great time. You're killing it. Keep the morale up, because when the morale starts to go down and people start to get tired, that's when things really start to head south. Um, So, handling an emergency. I'm going to read a little bit from the NSS Guide to Responsible Caving. It says in here that if an immobilizing accident or medical issue occurs that prevents a caver from safely exiting the cave, first treat any life-threatening injuries, keep the injured caver warm and dry using spare clothing, garbage bags, and foam pads. Write down the person's name, injuries and problems, and condition, any treatment, and the time and location of the incident. Send this information with at least two cavers to the surface to call for help, then prepare for a long wait. The exiting cavers should carefully mark their route to expedite return to the victim. The cavers who remain should keep notes on the injured caver's conditions, any treatment provided, and the times each occur. When calling 911, be sure to tell a dispatcher there is an emergency requiring a cave rescue trained team and the nature of the problem. You need to accurately provide the location of the cave and the place where you will meet the first responders, to lead them to the cave. So there have been, I'm pretty sure, whole talks like this regarding when it's time to do a call out rescue and when it's time to do a SPAR rescue or a small party assisted rescue. So that's kind of the outside of the scope of the talk today. But I will say that you, as a trip leader, should be prepared um, to handle some degree of injury or emergency in cave, uh, because it seems, in my experience, that more often than not, um, a lot of smaller problems, which smaller is a relative term, but they can be handled by the team that's there. Um, the importance is that you only have what you brought in with you to solve the problem that you have at hand. And this is what brings us to gear, about what do we carry in the cave and why do we carry it. Um, because as I said, the um, you don't have any additional things to help you. So I've heard a lot of folks, a lot of old timers say, "Oh, you guys carry too much stuff," and compared to what they carry, they're not wrong, except for the times when you need it. Because I can honestly say that I have been in situations where everyone on the team used everything in their pack, and we prayed that we had more. Um, because there are times where you need things that you don't have. So I'm going to go through kind of a pack dump of what I carry and talk about a couple of the different things. I've got some loose notes for this. I was going to bring some of my gear in. I've got a little bit of it here, but I didn't want to bring my dirty gear in my office. So, so let's start with packs. The selection of what pack we choose to use. Um, Swago, of course, is far and wide one of the most popular cave packs made, um, and for good reason, because it does a lot of things well. It's if I were to only have one cave pack, it would likely be just a Swago. Um, Also, the bags from On Rope One are great. I actually prefer those if it's not going to be a wet cave. Whereas a Swago, if I got to do a lot of crawling or anything wet, it's almost always a Swago. And then, of course, the larger expedition packs for when you need to carry more gear. So we'll kind of go bottom up of the order that I pack things in my cave pack. So what will be on the bottom of the bag and what stays on the very top. So generally, the first thing to go in is my hypothermia kit. And I say hypothermia kit because it's not just a Palmer furnace. And it's not just a trash bag. The way that I run mine is actually it's in an OP sack, which this one has been around a little bit. These OP sacks are great, and you can get them on Amazon. They're like Ziploc bags, but they're much tougher. So for gear like this, it's going to ride around your pack a lot and not get used a bunch. The OP sacks are great. The reason I call it a hypothermia kit and not just a Palmer furnace is because I carry extra stuff. So I've got, of course, a trash bag, and as I think we all know, get a nice trash bag, not just a kitchen bag, but a contractor bag, something nice and heavy that's durable, that A, can survive riding around your cave pack where you're not using it, and B, that is going to be durable underground. Um, So also in here, I carry a candle. It's one of the ICO 9-hour candles. I carry another one in my lunch as well. I take it and a Bic lighter and wrap them in aluminum foil. So the aluminum foil, once you unwrap this, makes a nice little stand for your candle that you can set it in for when it's on an even ground. I also carry waterproof matches. These have about had it. I carry matches in addition to the lighter, though you can generally get lighters to work when they're wet. One problem you can run into that I have in the past is that it'll get in a certain position in your pack to where it presses down the butane button and lets all the gas out of your lighter. So when you go to use it, it doesn't work. Um, Also in here, currently I've got a spare lighter and a battery because I've found that if I get my Palmer furnace out, chances are I'm going to need another battery too. And I am the kind of guy that would rather have way too many batteries that I pack around than to have the instance where I ever wanted to have another battery. Um, so I keep an extra battery in my hypothermia kit. So this all together goes in the bottom of my bag. I take it on every single cave trip. The next thing will go in there is my first aid kit. And I'm a big fan of these little Sea to Summit bags. They're pretty they're pretty durable. As long as you don't have a lot of hard objects in there, and if they are, um, that they're padded. So in this little orange bag here, this is my first aid and repair kit. Um, so for a first aid kit, I don't carry a whole lot. It's mainly things for blister care, for like moleskin, band-aids, things like that. Some gauze. I carry a little bit of quick clot in here in case there is a cut. Um, Regarding first aid, but not in this bag. Sometimes, depending on the trip, if we plan on climbing some things, I might throw a SAM split in my bag. But the majority of what's in here is actually medications for myself. I have some food allergies, so I carry 2 EpiPens, an inhaler, and Benadryl and steroids in here for myself. Which the folks that came with me a lot, they know about my allergies. They know that all the meds are in this little orange bag. Also inside here is my repair kit. I've got a multi-tool, small multi-tool, a light one. There's a little bit of bank line. If you guys don't know what bank line is, you need to look that up on Amazon. It's actually twisted waxed nylon string. It's smaller and lighter than paracord, but nearly as strong. It's actually what they use for trot lines for catching fish and things. But stuff's really strong. So keep some of that, a little bit of duct tape, some flagging tape, um, because if there is an injury, we got to flag our way out. I've got some flagging tape in here. There is some paper and a golf pencil. That way I can take notes for the patient themselves. I can also write a letter to the surface. Sometimes it's not an emergency. Maybe it's we've got 2 teams that are doing different things in the cave, and then one of us decides to leave, that we can go to an intersection, leave a note saying, hey, we're out of here, so don't come looking for us. Um, so that's in there. Some other medications, ibuprofen, some Imodium, because Imodium is always important. Um, got some zip ties, because zip ties are always a great thing to have underground. Some safety pins, some of the big heavy duty safety pins. Um, I'm thinking that's about all that's in there. Um, and then when it comes to spare light, currently I'm using this Pelican case. I'm not in love with the Pelican cases because they often tend to rub holes in your pack just because of all the corners. But I've been experimenting with this little one for a while. I've got a spare zebra light and 2 spare batteries in here. Since I've got 2 lights on my helmet, so this makes my third. Depending on the trip, if it's going to be longer or if we're going to be digging or surveying or things like that, a lot of times I'll throw a light around my neck. One of the things that I try to do, and I know it's not always possible, is I try to make sure that all my lights take the same batteries. There for a while, when I first got into caving, I had kind of a hodgepodge of different lights, and as I had to replace my light with a nicer, newer one, then my last one would become my backup. But the problem was then I had to have all these lights with all these batteries, and nothing fit the other. So I carry all zebra lights. Um, like I said, the two on my helmet, the one in here with two extra batteries. I've got an extra battery in my hypothermia kit, and I also keep an extra battery in my helmet. Um, that covers that. A spare shirt. Anytime that there is prolonged time in water that's over knee deep, I generally recommend that everybody bring a dry shirt. Um, the reason for this is that if you trip and fall and get your core soaked in just knee deep water, then the rest of the trip's going to be pretty miserable. Um, so it's always a good idea to carry an extra shirt if there is water of any sort. And also, if there is a problem, somebody sprains an ankle or what have you, and you've got to sit around for a little while, you have a spare shirt to stay warm. Um, then also in my pack, webbing. I know a lot of folks carry webbing, as do I. I carry a carabiner with it also, just a small aluminum carabiner, just because it gives you a little more flexibility because now you can tie a munter and have a friction device as well. I generally carry 30 feet, and depending on what's going on, I may carry a 4-foot loop of webbing that I can make into a diaper harness. Um, but generally try to have a couple people on the trip with webbing because it's the Swiss Army knife of caving that you can really do so many things with it. Um, as far as snacks go, so I my general thoughts on snacks when caving is to pretty much eat like a toddler. So the higher calorie, higher sugar things have more energy in them. So I'm a big fan of Snickers, like a lot of us. The little to-go peanut butter cups are really great. Um, the Welch's fruit snacks and the little applesauce packets are one of my favorite things ever. And each of those have a lot of calories for what they are. Snickers have almost 200, I think a little over 200 calories in them. And the same for those little peanut butter to go things. So between a couple Snickers and a couple of those peanut butter things, you've got nearly 1,000 calories. And for a longer trip, that's about what you want to run is about 1,000 calories because you burn a lot of calories caving. Um, Also, in terms of snacks, I generally would carry some goodies powder with it having acetaminophen and caffeine in it. It's a little bit of, especially when you're tired or someone else is tired, a little bit of a pick me up from the caffeine and a little bit of pain killing and swelling reducing action from the acetaminophen. Um, Goo energy gels. I used to ride a bicycle a lot, and Goo energy gels are one of my favorite things in the world. Not because of the taste, but because when you're really tired, they are quite the pick me up. Those along with the Cliff blocks, they're much the same, just in a different form. So if I'm doing a intro trip and I have a bunch of new people whose gear I know is not necessarily ruggedized for the cave environment, I also will carry what I call a newbie kit. And what that is a handful of AA batteries, a handful of AAA batteries, because nothing that I take underground uses either one of those batteries. But chances are somebody on the trip is going to run their light on high, and in an hour it's going to be dead. Um, a spare lamp, speaking of a spare headlamp, that's not one of yours, that's not one of your spares. So in other words, so you don't have to go down below having three lights and give up your spare. I take an additional one that I'm willing to give away. Um, because once again, there was a day that someone had a rechargeable light, so not with a swappable battery, and then their backups were handheld. Well, once again, we get an hour and a half into the trip, their light goes down, and then all they have is a handheld flashlight. So I end up giving them one of my lights to keep them going. But since that light did not have replaceable batteries, it didn't matter we had the double A's or the triple A's or 18650s of either variety. We still couldn't get their light going. So we need a spare light. And then even though I carry tape and zip ties in my repair kit, I carry a little extra when it comes to an intro trip because it's always, folks that have a hard hat that doesn't have the clips to retain your headlamp strap. Um, it's nice to have some duct tape to duct tape those on. Um, the backpack that they grabbed on their way out the door to take caving when the buckles blow up on that. It's nice to have zip ties to get that back together. Um, just those kind of things. Just kind of think through, the things that might be needed to help folks who weren't quite ready for the cave environment. And then water. So I try to carry about a liter of water on most 8 hour, 12-hour trips. Um, and when I do, I carry it in the smaller Nalgene's. There's a couple reasons for that. For one, 2 half-liter Nalgene's tend to pack better than one large 1 liter Nalgene does. I can just put them in different places in my pack. I can also drop one on the way in. Drop one in an intersection. That way I don't have to carry the weight of it as we go out. And then if we're coming back that same way, then I can go ahead and pick up that water, finish my other one before I get there. So divide up that way. Also, because I've run into times where people have forgotten water entirely, and you can pass them one of your bottles. Whereas if you only have one large bottle, then you've got to share it, and you get the Lady and the Tramp thing going, and it's weird because people don't like to drink after each other. I'm not a big fan. So then, also with water on a longer trip where you can't carry enough water, filtration is important. Um, Cave water, I'm unsure of the biology of what's in cave water, but I know that it can cause illness. One of the other things to deal with in cave water is surface runoff um, of pesticides and herbicides and things like that from the surface. So I would not ever recommend consuming cave water in any amount that's not been filtered. Um, One that I carry that I think is really great, and I don't have in front of me, is the Sawyer filter. It's a squeeze filter that just so happens to thread onto a smart water bottle. So if I'm using a filter, I'll carry one of my half-liter Nalgene's and a half-liter smart water bottle and the Sawyer filter. That way I can drink that smart water bottle first and then use that to gather water, screw my filter on, and then squeeze that filtered water into uh, my other water bottle. Um, Also, some folks prefer to take body armor, Gatorade, any number of things, or to take the little pouches of powder, like liquid IV, for instance, to put in their water underground. And I'm not opposed to that, but I personally, and this is just my opinion, I personally don't like not having fresh water because if I was to get some gypsum sand in my eye or something like that, then I don't want to rinse it out with Gatorade or cave water. So I if I do add anything to my water bottle, it's generally only to one of them, so I can keep fresh water in the other. Um, so I'm trying to think if there's anything that I have forgotten. Uh, I think that about wraps it up, and am more than happy to take questions.
Thank you, Adam. Does anybody have any questions for him about cave trips or scenarios that you guys have been in that maybe you have questions about whether or not you've how to do it better the next time around? Cool. You've covered everything then, and if nobody's got any questions. Well, we appreciate it. Thanks for the very informative talk. Um, and for the folks who are following Greater Cincinnati Grotto's monthly Cave Topics program, we will be doing a vertical practice on April 28th. That's a Sunday. At the Eden Park Wall in Cincinnati. So our April topic will basically be live. We probably will not be streaming anything off of that. And we'll come back in May with a program on basic hall systems. So keep us in mind. Yes, Sonny, there's a hand raised.
Yeah, I was curious, Adam, you said that there's times where there's certain things that you really wanted down there. What situation was that?
We actually had a caver who had fallen ill, and they were having a hard time staying upright, staying hydrated, or keeping anything down. And so you always hear about that. If anybody's hurt, you can always lay them on Swago pads and keep them warm, things like that. Swago pads aren't enough. If someone can't sit up on their own, Swago pads are not enough to insulate them from the cold rock. And also, Palmer furnaces do not work when people are laying down. So, yeah. So we were in. What we really wanted was a sleeping pad and a bag, but that wasn't coming anytime soon. So, but everybody, it all turned out fine.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Any other questions or comments? Stories to share? All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining.
Adam.
Oh, go for it.
Sorry. I was going to throw in. I've got one of the Katahdin, I think it's called B-Free filters. They're like the Sawyer Squeeze. And they fit on the Hydro Pack water bottles that are collapsible. So it's really great for saving space if you want a water filter too. But the squeezes are great either way. So
yeah, I agree. I like the squeeze filters.
Great tips. All right. Before I talk too much, anybody else? Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining. And if you have any ideas for future topics that you guys want to hear about, feel free to shoot us a message. You can either message me directly or message the Greater Cincinnati Grotto page. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you again in another month. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.